You know, Congressman, back some years ago, this is probably 5, 6 years ago, Bernie was doing one of his segments like this with us, and somebody called in about this topic, and he offered what I thought was the most common sense solution I've ever heard. And I'm wondering if it ever got any traction and if any of your colleagues. He suggested that any states that participate in interstate competition for a corporation moving within the United States. This was back when Boeing was playing states against each other. You know, who's going to give us the best deal if we move our headquarters out of Seattle? He suggested that any state that participates should lose their federal highway matching funds for at least a year or two. What do you think?
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, one of the things we used to try to do, we had a group called, it was the worst name, MPN, but it was the Midwest Progressive Elected Officials Network, state legislators in the upper Midwest. And we tried to stop this by saying, oh, let's all commit to having a high road to economics. Let's not allow this to happen. And we started doing proposals like if a company doesn't create the jobs they said they're going to, which is rarely, by the way, Tom, ever checked after the fact to see if they created what they said, that they have to give back money. Or if they leave within a certain amount of time, they have to give back money. We try to put some reasonable standards out there so that suddenly that company may not just grab all the money because they may have to pay some of it back. Right now, it's often a blank check with everyone going for the press release, and you just spent $3 billion for a press release that you created 13,000 jobs, when in reality, you may get a far smaller number of jobs, if any, at a much greater cost.
Yeah. Amen. Let's see here. Thomas in Seymour, Illinois, watching Free Speech TV on the Dish Network. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Okay, good morning. I was wondering, does Congress have oversight over the Supreme Court in our, whether or not they can, they could undo Citizens United?
If I may read from Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution, and then you can go off on it, Congressman.
Sure.
Article 3, Section 2 says, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. And yes, there has been legislation that specifically has said, within the legislation, the Supreme Court may not rule on this. To you, sir.
And specifically to Citizens United, I mean, there are several constitutional amendments that would address it. While there are several, the one that I personally think is the most effective is the one that Move to Amend nationally has been advocating for, which is pretty simple. It says money is not speech and corporations are not people. Not only do you get rid of the fundraising, anonymous money parts of End Citizens United, but you start to say a corporation is not a person in other parts of the law, which is also necessary.
Yeah, and which is, reversing the head note that John Chandler Bancroft Davis wrote into the 1886 Santa Clara County decision. Even though the decision went opposite of the head note, the Supreme Court has been quoting the head note for the last 150 years. It's absolutely crazy, this whole idea of corporate personhood.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we just have 10 seconds here. We're going to hit a break. But if anybody is interested, I wrote a book about this called Unequal Protection. I'm not trying to sell the book. You can read it for free online, the entire book, over at truthout.org. And it's about, the 14th Amendment, how corporations became people. Starts actually with the founding of the Republic, goes through 1886, goes through the Citizens United case, Buckley, all that stuff. CJ in Titusville, Florida. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Congressman, how are you?
Hey, good, CJ. Thank you.
Good.
I understand the taxpayers have pumped about $1 trillion into strategic defense initiative, missile defense. I never hear anything about that as being really the solution to this Korea thing. Do you think that might be just another MIC boondoggle?
Well, I'll tell you, let me say this, I think, because I didn't say this earlier, and I want to make sure I get it out. The Progressive Caucus, we have been urging for a long time, including President Obama, to commit to a no first use policy for nuclear weapons. And so, we've done this with both Democrat and Republican administrations. And, we just want to make sure that these are not used, especially as seemingly unthinkingly as President Trump has been talking about, right? I mean, the fact that he just says this so cavalier, and as you contrasted, Tom, with what President Truman and how he said it and when he said it versus saying it now and then watching his whole administration trying to put the words back out of the public airways, this is what's dangerous. So, a big part of it is I wish we had fewer nukes, period, across the world. I wish we'd invest more to bring in some of those old nukes and we go back to nuclear-free zones here in Wisconsin back in the early 80s. I remember working on, but I think that just having a commitment to a no first-use policy and other ideas that we've tried to put out there would be far better for us overall. And getting that new debate on an authorization is absolutely critical.
Tracy in Fredericksburg, Maryland. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Tracy? No, Tracy. Okay, let's try Martha in Dwight, North Dakota. Martha, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. But I got one question for the congressman. I'm here in North Dakota, and we're getting our butts kicked by law enforcement and stuff here. And I'm wondering where the representatives and any people like that are.
Marcia, what do you mean by getting our butts kicked by law enforcement?
Well, the dogs attacking us and the water cannons and all of that.
Are you part of a Native American community there?
No, I'm just a state member. And I'm wondering, how come we don't have any representatives out there helping us with our protests, with all of the things that we're fighting against?
This is with regard to Dakota Access Pipeline?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
And health care, all of the things that we're out protesting. I don't see a lot of congressmen helping.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
Congressman
so
Pocan.
I know that there have been a number of letters and I believe press conferences and other statements with members around that issue and other issues around it. So I know there's been activity. I think, what we often point back to is if the corporate media doesn't report it, did it happen? If a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to listen, did it, make a sound? This is often what happens. So members have advocated. I think the tough part is, we all have a tough travel schedule. Last week I was in New Jersey and Minnesota. This week I'm in Georgia. Next week I'm in Nevada. Following week I'm in Tennessee. That's in between trying to represent my district and do my job here. So, I know there are some members who've made more awareness than others on this, and I think you should try to invite folks to come to your area, but realize that, our first responsibility is to our districts. We're in Washington a lot of time, other than August happens to be this period where we're home. But as I just gave you part of my travel schedule, we're all trying to advocate on behalf of a lot of things, but this is one where I know activity has happened in Washington.
Jim in Lombard, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. Hi, Tom. I just had a thing I wanted to say. This is what I say. I think Republicans have been blinded by right-wing propaganda and money. And what we have is the blind leading the blind. There are physically blind people who have better mental vision than these Republicans do. What do you think of that?
Well, there's no question that so much of this comes to what their donors and their corporate masters via their donations do for their campaigns or why they make the decisions. There are some things that are core principles, I guess, that make someone a Republican, or especially these days the Tea Party. There's some interesting core principles, although largely around racism and xenophobia. But there's no question that money distorts things so much in politics, which is why, whether it be Citizens United or a variety of other measures that we talk about, you've got to adjust and address them. Otherwise, why would we allow pharmaceutical companies to continue to price gouge and do the activities they do? Why would we allow oil companies to still get subsidies despite record profits? I go down the list. There's a whole lot of bad decisions that happen because of their ability to influence campaigns with money, and you're right on that, Jim.
Mark in Chico, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. Hey, why they speak of Russia 24/7 and Korea, a lot of regulations are being discarded, and a lot of those we aren't going to get back. And, I think it's really time for people to start speaking up about the regulations that Trump and his cohorts are getting rid of. So I wish he would talk about that.
Yeah. So let me say a couple things. I mean, one, I think we are definitely trying to point out this rollback of regulations often means protections for things like clean air and clean water and worker safety and a whole lot of things that the vast majority of people support. But when you just give it a generic name like it's a burdensome regulation that's stopping job creation, which is usually the specter they raise, there's a whole lot more to often what they're trying to roll back. And we see this in nearly every single area, and this is something that I would argue that President Trump has been mildly successful on, because a lot of this is regulated by the agencies that he himself has appointed. So we need to keep speaking out on these, right, and keep making sure that people realize that what may be called in the vernacular, just another regulation, is really protecting your water and your air, and the fact that you can go home at the end of a day and not be injured or dead.
And shouldn't we add to that protecting us from corporations who are willing to harm us in the name of profits?
Absolutely. And I think what we need to do, I'm a big believer of storytelling, and I think we have to make sure that people hear more of the stories of why just getting rid of a regulation is not as simple as that sounds, that it affects real people and that it could affect their family as well as people they love.
We just have a half a minute to the end of the hour, Congressman. What should we be looking for in this coming week here?
I'll tell you, Tom, I've quit trying to answer a question like that. Every week I get surprised by this president. Like I said, the one piece of advice I give people a lot, if he talks about something, often it's not going to happen. But I worry about the stuff he doesn't talk about that all of a sudden he does. So sometimes it may be good if he's talking about it because it's just his bravado, and then we know. I'm starting to read some signals, but keep watching North Korea, clearly important, and make sure they're not backdooring some health care legislation that's going to hurt a lot of people.
And you mentioned quite a bit of traveling you're doing. I'm assuming people can find your schedule over at pocan.house.gov?
In some cases. I mean, I'll be at Netroots Nation doing a couple panels in different spots. We'll be doing some town halls in this area, too.
Okay, great. Congressman Mark Pocan, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, as always.
Great talking with you. Middays with Mark. We'll be right back.